Welcome back. In this video, I'll try to help you unpack the terms identified in the text as production and reproduction. Doing so, we'll also uncover how these activities contribute to our understandings of education as a political act. Once again, just be sure that you've read this background information so that you have some idea of the broader context in which I'm drawing on today. The first term I'll endeavour to unpack in this presentation is the concept of production. At its simplest and most literal form, a context of production is a site where a process of production occurs. Let's use the example of a bakery as a context or site where certain processes are enacted to produce bread. At a more complex and less visible way, contexts of production also produce conditions or arrangements that shape our understandings, evidenced as words, ideas, which we call sayings, activities with the doings, and our relationships or relatings with the product we call bread. The context of producing bread in a particular society at a particular time also produces tacit understandings of what we know about the product bread and how we convey that to others. For example, when I say the word wholemeal, most of you, unless you are new to the society in which it is produced, would be able to visualise a type of bread I'm referring to. Because we share the same language, we also have a shared understanding of the product that I've called wholemeal bread. We call these discursive, meaning words and ideas, products. So discursive, discussion, conversations, words, ideas. Similarly, the production of bread has also led to the co-production of cultural norms or expectations. For example, it's quite normal to eat toast for breakfast but not for dinner. Why is that? The nutritional value of some breads has been challenged by cultural norms associated with particular views of what constitutes a healthy diet in a particular society, which interestingly may not be shared in another. We call these cultural meanings, these cultural products, cultural arrangements, which just shape the way our norms, our expectations around the product. These cultural discursive products of making bread form arrangements or conditions that shape our understanding of the product and the ways we communicate about it to others. And it's important to know that there are many, if have travelled anywhere in the world, these cultural arrangements change as you move through different cultural contexts. Social and political products are also associated. Oh, sorry, I'm one slide ahead of myself. Here we go. Social and political products are also associated with the process of making bread. As alluded to in the previous example, there are particular social and political norms in societies that shape the way citizens engage with the product bread. These conditions or arrangements can shape practices such as the consumption of particular breads, and when associated with political aims can be linked to powerful acts such as limiting or steering in a particular direction the consumption of the product. I think thinking about white bread, whether or not people eat white bread and in preference to other supposedly nutritious forms. Material economic products associated with the process of making bread could include the physical setups, such as the specialist equipment in the bakery, the shop counter, whether the baker owns a van to do his or her deliveries, and financial concerns like buying the flour, paying for rent, paying for staff, making a profit. For the consumer, it's likely our practices will be shaped by these arrangements according to our access to the bakery, where it's situated, the cost of the bread, how it tastes. These conditions or arrangements work to shape the practices possible within and beyond the physical context of production, which is the bakery. At this point in time, it's important to note that whilst we've discussed these arrangements or products as discrete entities, they do in fact unfold together in the practice, which we've talked about here, the production of bread. As such, they continuously shape and reshape the production process. And they're specific from site to site. So the production of bread in one site will never be have the same arrangements as it will in another. They might be similar, but then they will never be the same because they'll involve different practitioners. According to the text, a context of reproduction is any context designed to reproduce knowledge, skills, values and norms appropriate for participation in context of production. And it highlights that schools or places or educational settings are the most obvious of these contexts of reproduction. So for instance, in this image, a context of reproduction here is the two apprentices, I'm gathering, learning from the master baker. Whilst they are actually producing there, they're being shown and guided how to reproduce bread in a particular way, and that will be shaped by that baker in the image there. Almost always, as I've just said then, production is shadowed by reproduction. So whilst we're producing things, we're also thinking about, if I had to explain this to someone else, or if I had to teach someone how to do this, how would I do that? It's most obviously witnessed when more experienced producers, like teachers, model, guide and teach less experienced or potential producers, such as yourselves as undergraduate teachers. I'm sure we've all had good and bad experiences of working with more experienced colleagues or peers, and I know that some people are better at delivering and receiving the process of reproduction. The ability to capture and convey the knowledge, skills, values and norms necessary to go on and engage in the same act of production could well be the quintessential criteria for becoming a teacher. Often the how-to of reproduction is recorded as text, like manuals that step you through the essential steps of production. Thinking about this, my mind goes straight to IKEA instructions and for producing pieces of furniture, and I'm reminded that the translation of the production into text is not always helpful. So looking again at this example of a baker, we've got let's presume that this fellow is Joseph Amendola. He's not, but let's presume he is. So he's written a manual that his apprentices are likely to be reading, and that manual is going to be written from his worldview of baking, of being a baker. That may not be the same in another culture. The type of bread that this baker and the methods and the tools are going to be different in different cultures. So, the dilemma or problem faced in education is that once learners are taken out of the context of production, there is a danger that the translation of production, reproduction, is at risk of being disassociated from the context in which it was once produced, and that it will be required to be produced meaningfully in the future. So once we take the apprentices out of the bakery, where they're actually working with their mentor, then we take them into perhaps TAFE to learn a whole lot of rules and regulations about running a bakery and keeping it clean and all of those sorts of things. We run the risk of disconnecting the student from the product, if you like, through that process of reproduction. All incredibly necessary, but it's a risk. So relating that concern specifically to education, institutions, typically schools, have become sites of reproduction that rely on a range of strategies and artefacts to reproduce and represent the knowledge, skills, values and norms associated with being educated. In education, this representation is materialised ideologically as the process of curriculum development and materially as text in curriculum documents. The decision what to include and exclude from these documents is a political act. Who gets to decide what constitutes a good education? Who gets to decide what goes into those documents and what gets left out? Food for thought. So, following up on Bernstein's notions of tensions, if we look at curriculum as text, he would suggest that curriculum, pedagogy and assessment are all tools of reproduction that are at risk of forming tensions by being overly narrow and specified and by being standardised, because they run the risk of not being applicable in particular circumstances. Okay, that's enough for now. Coming up next, let's talk about transformative education, or specifically the concept of transformation.